Alright, so hi guys. Okay, so in this video, what I want to do is we are going to go ahead and solve quadratic equations by taking the square root. Give me 1 second, guys. Okay, guys, sorry about that. Okay, so like I said in this video, we're going to go over solving quadratic equations by taking square roots. But this time, we are going to do it using imaginary numbers, otherwise known as complex solutions. So I do want to go over one definition, and that is this one. One of the common errors that people think, or that I at least was taught in high school, which was wrong, was that the imaginary number equaled plus or minus the square root of -1. That is only when you're doing the quadratic formula. So this imaginary number I, it's only the positive or the positive square root of -1. Since we are talking about quadratic equations, however, I do want to say that you will do plus or minus, just like we were doing before. So here we have 5 questions or 5 problems, so we're going to go over them. And then in a different video, we are going to go over how to solve quadratics by doing quadratic formula. So the first one we have here is 3x squared plus 7 equals 0. So let's go ahead and do that. So the first one I have here is 3x squared plus 7 equals 0. Now, what I'm going to do here, we're basically doing the same thing where we subtract 7 on both sides, so like that. And then we go ahead and do 3x squared equals -7. So it's kind of the same process as we were doing before. And then we would divide by 3 on both sides to do, to get rid of that fraction. So there we go. And then we have x squared equals -7 over 3. Now here is where we have to be careful. So this is what I was talking about. When you take the square roots, just like we were doing before in a previous video, we need to do plus or minus. So we are going to do x equals plus or minus the square root of -7/3. Now notice there is a negative here. In the real number line, there is no such thing as a negative number. That is why we call it an imaginary number. So I is imaginary. Or complex, right? But we also call it imaginary, and we know, like I said, I is equal to the square root of -1. So what I can say here is x equals plus or minus the square root of -1 times 7/3. This is going to be equal to plus or minus the square root of -1 times the square root of 7 over 3. And like I said, this is the imaginary number. Now again, because we're doing positive and negative, and we're doing quadratic equations, you need to include plus or minus in there because there are 2 solutions. So we are going to do plus or minus I, and we have the square root of 7 over square root of 3. So if you guys don't remember, square root of a over square root of b is square root a over b. Now here is where we're going to go ahead and rationalize this stuff. So this part here, we're going to go ahead and rationalize it. So basically, we're going to do times the square root of 3 over square root of 3. And then finally, we're going to do square root of 21 over 3 because you just multiply the 2 numbers there. So then our answer becomes x equals plus or minus. It's going to be I square root of 21 over 3. You can include it as 2 separate answers. So negative I square root 21 over 3, comma, I square root 21 over 3. You can also say negative I square root 21 over 3, or it doesn't matter as long as you put both answers. Okay, so that is the first example. Number 2. Number 2 is going to be the following. X minus 8 squared equals negative 25. So, okay. Now, the way we're going to do this, we're going to first take the square roots, right? Because we need to get rid of that squared term. So we're going to do x minus 8 equals plus or minus. Again, we're going to do that plus or minus thing because we have two answers. It's going to be the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 25. And so now we have x minus 8 equals, so it's going to be plus or minus I square root 25. And again, square root of 25 is 5. So the way you can do this is plus or minus 5i. Because, again, the square root of 25 is 5, and the negative 1 is this one, I. This will be plus 8 on both sides. And so we will have x equals 8 plus or minus 5i. So again, we will write our answers as x equals 8 plus 5i, comma 8 minus 5i. And this will be our answer. Okay, guys, that is number 2. Number 3, we have, let's see here, 3x squared plus 4 equals 0. Sorry about that. So here we're going to again do the same thing. Subtract 4 on both sides. We have 3x squared equals negative 4. And then divide both sides by 3. And we know we have x squared equals negative 4/3. Now take the square root. It'll be x equals plus or minus the square root of negative 4 over the square root of 3. This one's a little tricky, guys. So we can put x equals, and it's going to be plus or minus 2i over the square root of 3. This includes two things, x equals negative 2i over the square root of 3, or x equals 2i over the square root of 3. We're going to rationalize these two, because again, we don't want a square root on the bottom. So the way this is going to go is going to be x equals negative 2i square root 3 over the square root of 3 squared, because we're just multiplying times square root of 3 on top and bottom. This gives me negative 2i square root 3 over 3. So that's one of our answers. And since the other answer is just the positive of that, this one would end up being x equals 2i square root 3 over 3, because they're the same thing, but it's just positive and negative, okay? So these are my two solutions for this one. Okay. And now for number 4. So number 4, we have 5x squared plus 4 equals 0. So we're going to first subtract 4 on both sides. We have 5x squared equals negative 4, right? And then we divide by 5. So then we have x squared equals negative 4/5. So we're going to go ahead and take the square root. And then lastly, we have x equals plus or minus, and it's going to be the square root of negative 4 over the square root of 5. So again, this is one of those, like before, this is going to be plus or minus, and we're going to do the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 4. It's going to be plus or minus I, and then times 2, right? So the square root of 4 is 2, and then all over square root 5. So this is, again, one of those types of problems where we need to rationalize the denominator. So this is plus or minus 2i over square root 5. We can, again, do the positive and negative of whatever we get after we rationalize it. So we're going to do 2i over square root 5 times the square root of 5 over the square root of 5 is equal to 2i square root 5 all over 5. So x equals negative 2i square root 5, and then over 5, and then comma 2i square root 5 over 5. Okay guys, so this is going to be our last one for this video. We have 3x squared plus 1 equals negative 8. So, again, we're going to do the same thing. Now notice this one is actually equal to a number. This one's different, so what you're going to do is you're going to want to get rid of whatever's in here. Doesn't matter. This is only for square roots as well as completing the square, but not for factoring or anything like that. Here, we're just going to subtract 1 on both sides, and then we have 3x squared equals negative 9, and then we're going to divide by 3 on both sides to get rid of that whole number there. We have x squared equals negative 3. And then finally, we're going to go ahead and take the square root of both sides. So then this will be x equals, and again, it'll be the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 3. Again, the square root of negative 1 is going to be x equals plus or minus. This is going to be I, and then times the square root of 3. So our answers are x equals negative I square root 3 and x equals I square root 3. So those are our answers. Okay guys, so with that being said, this is going to be it for this video. And so again, if anybody has any questions over these, please let me know. In the next video, I'm most likely going to be doing some problems using quadratic formula. So we're going to get more into how imaginary solutions work with quadratic formulas. So with that being said, guys, that is going to be it for this video. If anybody has any questions, please let me know, and also please like, comment, and or subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye guys.